I was wearing my sister's engagement ring when I kissed her fiancé for the first time, and the weight of it felt like justice. He thought I was Stella. Of course, everyone always did when I wanted them to. The difference was that this time, I wanted him to be wrong. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how I became a ghost in my own life. And how I learned that the best revenge isn't making someone pay for what they did to you. It's making them realize they never knew you at all. My name is Luna Ashford. Though for 3 years, I barely heard anyone say it. I became an echo, a shadow, a replacement part for a machine that couldn't afford to break down. That machine was my family, and the part I replaced was my twin sister. Stella, the girl who got sick, stayed sick, and then got better just in time to steal my entire existence. We were identical in every way that mattered to other people. Same honey blonde hair that fell in waves to our shoulders. Same green eyes that our mother called striking in Stella and nice in me. Same height, same build. Same face that launched our family's social standing into the stratosphere when we were children. Our father, Richard Ashford, built his real estate empire on the image of the perfect family. And Stella and I were the cornerstone of that image to beautiful daughters who proved his success, his virility, his right to belong among the city's elite. The difference between us was invisible to everyone except me. Stella was the sun, bright and demanding, pulling everyone into her orbit with effortless gravity. I was the moon, reflective and quiet, content to glow with borrowed light. She spoke, and people listened. I spoke, and people waited for her to translate. She walked into rooms, and they rearranged themselves around her. I walked into rooms, and people barely noticed I'd arrived. I didn't mind, not really. I loved my sister. I loved her with the fierce, uncomplicated devotion of someone who had shared a womb, a room, a face, a life. When we were 7, and she broke her arm falling from the tree I dared her to climb. I broke mine on purpose, so she wouldn't have to be alone in her cast. When we were 13, and she got her period first, I pretended I'd gotten mine, too, so she wouldn't feel self-conscious. When we were 16, and she wanted to audition for the lead in the school play, but was too nervous, I auditioned first and bombed it intentionally, making her look brilliant by comparison. That's who I was. That's who I'd always been. The warm-up act. The safety net. The girl who made sure Stella could shine without fear of falling. Then, 3 weeks after our 20th birthday, Stella collapsed during a charity gala at the Fairmont Hotel. One moment, she was laughing with Sebastian, the son of our father's biggest business partner, her boyfriend of 2 years, the golden boy she'd been expected to marry since we were children, and the next, she was on the floor, her champagne glass shattered beside her. Her body seizing in a way that made everyone in the room go silent with horror. Lupus, the doctors said. Systemic lupus erythematosus, with complications. Her immune system was attacking her own body, and the flare-up had been building for months, maybe years, hidden beneath the surface of her perfect skin. The prognosis was uncertain. The treatment would be long, exhausting, and there was no guarantee it would work. She would need to rest, to avoid stress, to disappear from public life for an indefinite period while they figured out how to keep her alive. Our mother, Christine, took the news with the same expression she'd worn when the caterer served the wrong hors d'oeuvres at her spring fundraiser, tight-lipped disappointment, and a determination to fix the problem before anyone noticed. Our father paced the hospital waiting room like a caged animal, his phone pressed to his ear as he cancelled meetings and rescheduled appearances and tried to control a narrative that was already spiraling beyond his reach. I sat beside Stella's hospital bed and held her hand while she cried. She was terrified, not just of dying but of disappearing, of becoming irrelevant, of losing her place in the world she'd spent 20 years building. She kept saying she couldn't let anyone know how bad it was, that people would treat her differently, that everything she'd worked for would crumble if they saw her as weak. I told her it would be okay. I told her we'd figure it out together. I had no idea what I was promising. My father came to me 3 days later, after Stella had been moved to a private room where she could begin treatment away from curious eyes. He sat down across from me in the hospital cafeteria, his coffee untouched between us, and looked at me with an expression I'd never seen before. Calculating, hopeful in a way that made my stomach twist. He said he had an idea. A way to protect Stella, to protect the family, to make sure that when she recovered, and she would recover. He said this with absolute certainty. She would still have her life waiting for her. All I had to do was step in for a little while, go to her events, maintain her social calendar, keep up appearances until she was well enough to reclaim her place. I said no immediately. Not because I didn't want to help Stella, but because the idea was insane. People would notice. Sebastian would notice. Our friends would notice. I wasn't Stella, no matter how much we looked alike. I didn't have her charisma, her confidence, her ability to make people love her just by existing in their proximity. My father leaned forward and said, "Luna, you've spent your entire life in her shadow. You know her better than anyone. You've watched her, studied her, become her in every way except the one that matters. You've never tried to take what's hers." His voice was gentle, persuasive, the same tone he used in boardrooms when he wanted someone to sign a contract they'd regret. "I'm not asking you to replace her. I'm asking you to keep her place warm until she can come back to it. She needs you. We all need you." I looked down at my hands and tried to find a reason to refuse that didn't sound selfish. Stella was sick. Stella was scared. Stella needed me to do this one thing, this one impossible thing, so she could focus on getting better instead of worrying about losing everything she'd built. What kind of sister would I be if I said no? So I said yes. God help me. I said yes. The transformation took 2 weeks. My mother hired a team of stylists, voice coaches, and behaviorists who studied Stella's mannerisms like archaeologists decoding ancient texts. They taught me how she walked confident, purposeful, with a slight sway in her hips that drew attention without seeming to try. They taught me how she spoke warm but never effusive, friendly but never desperate, with a laugh that was musical without being shrill. They taught me how she held a champagne glass, how she greeted old friends and strangers, how she listened to boring stories, with just enough interest to be polite without encouraging people to continue. I already knew most of it. I'd spent 20 years watching her, after all. But knowing and doing were different things, and doing it while everyone was watching was something else entirely. I practiced in front of mirrors until I could see Stella looking back at me instead of my own reflection. I recorded myself speaking until I could hear her voice coming from my throat. I walked through our house with books balanced on my head until I moved with her grace instead of my own careful steps. Sebastian was the biggest challenge. He'd been dating Stella for 2 years, and he knew her in ways I didn't, intimate ways, private ways, ways that couldn't be taught by voice coaches or mimicked through observation. My mother said not to worry, that men barely noticed the differences in women anyway. That as long as I looked right and said the right things, he'd see what he expected to see. She was right. And that should have warned me about everything that came after. The first time I went out as Stella was to a charity luncheon at the country club. The kind of event she attended twice a month with barely any preparation. I spent 3 hours getting ready, my hands shaking so badly that my mother had to do my makeup because I couldn't hold the eyeliner steady. I wore Stella's favorite dress, carried her favorite bag, sprayed myself with her perfume until I could barely breathe. Through the cloud of jasmine and vanilla, when I walked into the country club dining room, heads turned the way they always did for Stella. Women smiled and waved. Men straightened in their chairs. The president of the auxiliary committee rushed over to greet me with air kisses and compliments about my shoes. I smiled Stella's smile and said Stella's words and felt like a puppet being operated by invisible strings. No one noticed. Not a single person looked at me and saw Luna pretending to be Stella. They saw Stella having a good day, and that was enough. I went home and threw up in the bathroom while my mother told me I'd done beautifully. Stella called from the hospital. She was still undergoing treatment. Still too weak to leave and thanked me with tears in her voice. She said I was saving her life, that she didn't know what she'd do without me, that as soon as she was better, she'd make it up to me somehow. I believed her. That was my first mistake. The second time was easier. The third time was easier still. By the 10th time, I barely had to think about it anymore. I showed up to events in Stella's clothes, spoke in Stella's voice, laughed at Stella's jokes, and everyone treated me like I belonged. Like I was her. Like there had never been a difference between us at all. Sebastian was the strangest part. He would pick me up for dates, dinners at expensive restaurants, weekend trips to his family's lake house, nights at the theater or the symphony, or whatever event Stella had marked on her calendar before she got sick. He would hold my hand and kiss my cheek and tell me I looked beautiful. And I would smile and thank him and wonder if he could feel the difference in the way I kissed him back. If he noticed that I was a half-second too slow to laugh at his jokes, or that I asked questions Stella would already know the answers to, or that I sometimes forgot which stories were hers and which were mine. If he noticed, he never said anything. He was kind to me to Stella. He thought in a distant, affectionate way that suggested he loved the idea of her more than the reality. He talked about their future together, about the wedding they'd have after she finished graduate school, about the house they'd buy in the same neighborhood as his parents, about the children they'd name after family members neither of them particularly liked. He never asked what I wanted. He never seemed to wonder if the girl he was talking to had dreams of her own. I told myself it didn't matter. I was just keeping the seat warm, just holding the space until Stella could reclaim it. Whatever Sebastian felt or didn't feel for the girl he thought was his girlfriend wasn't my concern. I wasn't really there. I was a placeholder, a substitute, a temporary solution to a temporary problem. 3 months passed, 6 months, a year. Stella's treatment was working, slowly but surely. She was getting stronger. Her symptoms were receding. The doctors were cautiously optimistic. But she wasn't ready to come back yet. My parents said she needed more time, more rest, more privacy. Just a little longer, and then everything would go back to normal. In the meantime, I went to graduate school, Stella's graduate school, studying art history at her university, taking her classes, sitting in her seat. I made friends with her friends, laughed at their inside jokes, pretended to remember shared experiences I'd never had. I went to Sebastian's family dinners and smiled through his mother's pointed comments about when we'd get engaged. I went to my father's business events and charmed his clients and played the role of the perfect daughter who made him look good. I gave up my own graduate program in literature. I gave up my own friends, the few I'd had who weren't also Stella's. I gave up my own apartment and moved back home so I could be available whenever Stella needed me to be her. I gave up my name, my face, my identity, and wore my sisters like a costume I could never take off. And somewhere in the middle of that year, something shifted. I stopped feeling like I was pretending to be Stella. I started feeling like I was becoming her. Her confidence seeped into my bones. Her social ease became my default state. Her way of moving through the world like she owned it. Like she deserved every good thing that came to her became mine too. I was good at being Stella. Better than I'd ever been at being Luna. And that realization should have terrified me. But instead it felt like relief. Then, after 18 months of treatment and recovery and hiding, Stella came home. She walked into our parents' house with color in her cheeks and strength in her step. And she looked at me with the same grateful smile she'd worn the day I agreed to help her. She hugged me and thanked me and told me I'd been amazing. That she couldn't have gotten through it without me. That she'd never forget what I'd done for her. I waited for her to tell me I could stop now. That she was ready to take her life back. That I could return to being Luna, whoever that was anymore. She didn't say that. Instead, she said she needed a little more time. Just a few more weeks to ease back into things, to regain her strength, to figure out how to re-enter her life without shocking everyone with how much she'd changed. She'd lost weight during her illness, gained it back in different places. Her hair had fallen out and grown back slightly darker. Her skin had a few new scars from the treatments. She needed time to look like herself again before people saw her, so I stayed Stella for a few more weeks. Then a few more after that. Then a month. Then 2. And while I was out being Stella, she was home becoming me. Or becoming the version of herself she wanted to be. Which looked suspiciously like the life I'd built while wearing her name. She started attending events with me as Luna, the shy twin sister who'd spent the last year and a half taking care of family business while Stella recovered from a minor health issue. She wore my clothes, adopted my quieter mannerisms, played the role of the supportive sister who was happy to step back now that Stella was healthy again. And people believed it. Of course, they believed it. They'd always seen me as the lesser twin, anyway. It made perfect sense that I'd been content to live in her shadow while she was gone. And that I'd be relieved to return to obscurity now that she was back. Except, I hadn't been living in her shadow. I'd been living in her light, wearing her crown, being the girl everyone wanted to see. And she was taking it back without acknowledging that I'd done more than just keep it warm for her. The first time I realized what was happening was at one of Sebastian's family dinners. 3 months after Stella came home. I was there as Stella, sitting beside Sebastian, playing the role I'd perfected over the last year and a half. My real sister wearing my face. My clothes, my name sat across from us, quiet and supportive. Asking polite questions and laughing at appropriate moments. Sebastian's mother was telling a story about a vacation they'd taken the previous summer. Something about a boat and a storm, and Sebastian's father's terrible sense of direction. I laughed along with everyone else, and then she turned to me and said, "You remember, don't you, Stella? You and Sebastian were supposed to come with us, but you had that gallery opening you couldn't miss. I did remember. I'd gone to that gallery opening one of Stella's former classmates, showcasing abstract paintings that looked like expensive wallpaper. I'd stood there for 3 hours, making conversation with pretentious art dealers and smiling until my face hurt. I'd bought one of the paintings because Stella would have, even though I thought it was hideous. I'd done it all perfectly, exactly as she would have done it. Before I could respond, my sister, Luna, everyone's thoughts poke up. "That opening was incredible," she said, her voice soft but certain. "The artist's use of negative space was revolutionary." I ended up buying one of her pieces. Everyone turned to look at her, and I felt something cold slide down my spine. She was taking credit for something I'd done. Something she hadn't even been there for. And she was doing it smoothly, confidently. Like it was the most natural thing in the world to claim my experiences as her own. I opened my mouth to correct her. To say that actually, Stella, the real Stella, had been too sick to attend that opening. That I was the one who'd gone. That I was the one who'd made the connections and bought the painting. And spent 3 hours pretending to understand art I didn't care about. But I couldn't say any of that. Because as far as everyone at this table knew, I was Stella. The real Stella had been at that opening. The girl across from me, the one wearing my face, was just Luna, the supportive sister who'd helped hold things together while Stella was unwell. If I called her out, I'd have to explain everything. The deception. The last 18 months. The fact that the girl Sebastian had been dating, kissing, planning a future with wasn't the girl he thought she was. So I smiled and said nothing. And my sister smiled back at me with my own face. And I saw something in her eyes that I'd never seen before. Triumph. She'd taken something from me. And she knew I couldn't do anything about it without destroying everything. It happened again and again after that. At dinner parties, at fundraisers, at family gatherings. She would casually mention things I'd done while pretending to be her. Experiences I'd had, relationships I'd built, accomplishments I'd earned. She would tell stories about conversations I'd had with people she'd never met. She would laugh about inside jokes from friendships I'd cultivated. And everyone would nod and smile and treat her like she'd been there all along. She was stealing my life. The one I'd built while wearing her name. And because I'd built it with her name, I had no way to prove it was mine. The worst part was Sebastian. He and Stella had been dating for 2 years before she got sick. But they'd never been particularly close. Friendly, affectionate, but distant in the way of people who'd been thrown together by circumstance and expectation rather than genuine connection. But over the 18 months I'd been pretending to be her, something had changed. Sebastian and I had grown closer. We'd had real conversations, shared actual intimacies. Built something that felt more substantial than the polite relationship he'd had with the real Stella. I'd fallen in love with him. Slowly, reluctantly, guiltily. I'd fallen in love with my sister's boyfriend while wearing my sister's face. And I'd told myself it didn't matter because I'd never really have him. When Stella came back, he would be hers again. And I would fade back into being Luna. And whatever feelings had grown between us would disappear like they'd never existed. But now Stella was back, and she wanted him. Not because she loved him, I'd seen enough of her to know she felt about Sebastian the way she felt about her designer handbags. As a pleasant accessory that confirmed her status, but because he was hers. Because he'd always been hers. Because taking him back was part of reclaiming everything she'd left behind. The problem was that Sebastian had changed to the girl he'd been dating for the last 18 months had been me, not her. The intimacy he'd built, the connection he'd felt, the love he'd fallen into had all been with Luna pretending to be Stella, not with Stella herself. She didn't know that. She thought she could just step back into her life and everything would be exactly as she'd left it. She thought Sebastian would fall back in love with her because he'd been in love with her before, not realizing that the girl he loved now was someone else entirely. I watched it happen with a sick fascination. She would try to kiss him the way I'd kissed him, but her timing would be off, her touch too aggressive or too tentative. She would try to make him laugh the way I'd made him laugh, but her jokes would land wrong, her delivery too sharp or too soft. She would try to have the conversations we'd had, but she didn't know what we'd talked about, what inside jokes we'd developed, what vulnerabilities we'd shared. Sebastian noticed. I could see it in the way he looked at her, confused, slightly disappointed. Like he was trying to find something familiar in a stranger's face. He didn't say anything, probably didn't even consciously realize what was wrong, but the disconnect was there. The girl he loved had disappeared and been replaced by someone who looked like her but felt wrong, and I realized something crucial. I could give her everything else. I could give her back her friends, her social calendar, her place in our family's empire. But I couldn't give her back Sebastian. Because the Sebastian she'd left behind wasn't the Sebastian who existed now. The man who existed now was in love with me. That's when I stopped feeling guilty and started feeling angry. I'd given up 18 months of my life to protect her. I'd abandoned my own dreams, my own identity, my own existence to make sure she didn't lose hers. I'd become so good at being her that I'd forgotten how to be myself. And now that she was better, now that she was back, she wasn't even acknowledging what I'd sacrificed. She was just taking it all back like it had always been hers, like I'd been a simple caretaker rather than the architect of the life. She was reclaiming. She was taking credit for my accomplishments. She was wearing the friendships I'd built like borrowed jewelry. She was trying to slide back into a relationship I'd deepened while she was gone. And she was doing it all without once saying thank you. Without once acknowledging that the life she'd returned to was better, fuller, richer than the one she'd left behind. That I was the reason why. So I decided to take it back. All of it. But not the way she'd taken it from me, quietly, insidiously, with plausible deniability and a smile. I was going to take it back loudly, publicly, catastrophically. I was going to destroy everything she'd reclaimed. And then I was going to make sure everyone knew exactly who had built it in the first place. I was going to become Stella one more time. But this time, I wasn't going to be the Stella who made her look good. I was going to be the Stella who destroyed her. The plan came to me fully formed one night as I lay in bed listening to her laugh in the next room. She was on the phone with one of her friends, one of the friends I'd maintained relationships with for 18 months. One of the friends who now thought Stella had been there all along. And she was telling a story about something I'd done. She was making them laugh with my joke, building connection with my charm, being loved for my effort. I got out of bed, walked to my closet, and pulled out Stella's clothes. The ones I'd worn so often, they felt more mine than hers. The ones that had transformed me from Luna the shadow into Stella the sun. I laid them out on my bed like a uniform, like battle armor. Like the skin of a snake I was about to shed one final time. Then I started planning. The first thing I needed to do was establish that Stella, the real Stella, the one everyone thought had been healthy and present for the last 18 months, was unstable, erratic, capable of behavior that would shock the people who loved her. I needed to create doubt in their minds about who she really was, so that when everything fell apart, they'd believe it was her fault and not mine. I started small. I'd go out as Stella and drink too much at events where she was known for her restraint. I'd flirt too openly with men who weren't Sebastian, creating whispers about trouble in their perfect relationship. I'd miss appointments she'd never miss. Forget conversations she'd never forget. Act in ways that were just slightly off from what people expected from her. Each incident was minor on its own, but together, they built a narrative. Stella wasn't quite herself lately. Stella seemed different. Stella was drinking more, caring less, letting things slip. Must be the stress of her recovery, people said. Must be hard to come back after being gone for so long. My sister noticed, of course. She pulled me aside after a particularly disastrous charity event where I'd accidentally spilled wine on the guest of honor and laughed too loudly at an inappropriate joke. "What are you doing?" she asked, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "You're making me look bad." I looked at her with wide, innocent eyes. "I'm just being Stella," I said. "Isn't that what you wanted?" She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw the first flicker of realization cross her face. She was starting to understand that the monster she'd created had developed teeth of its own. But it was too late to stop me now. She'd given me too much power, taught me too well how to be her. If she tried to expose me, she'd expose herself too. She'd have to admit that for 18 months. The girl everyone thought was Stella had actually been Luna. She'd have to explain why she'd deceived everyone. Why she'd let me take her place. Why she'd been too weak to maintain her own life. She couldn't do that. Her pride wouldn't let her. So she said nothing, just watched me with growing horror as I continued to dismantle her reputation, one event at a time. The second phase of my plan was Sebastian. I needed him to fall even more deeply in love with me, to create a bond so strong that when I finally revealed the truth, the betrayal would destroy not just him but Stella too. Because she'd realize that the man she thought loved her had actually been in love with her sister all along. It was easier than I expected. Sebastian was already in love with the version of Stella I'd created over the last 18 months. All I had to do was amplify those qualities, deepen that connection, make myself absolutely irreplaceable to him. I started showing up at his office with lunch, just like I used to do when I was pretending to be Stella full-time. I'd kiss him in front of his colleagues, creating witnesses to our passion. I'd whisper things to him that the real Stella would never say, vulnerable things, intimate things, things that made him feel like he was seeing a side of her no one else got to see. I told him I loved him. Not the casual, expected "I love you" that couples exchanged like currency, but the raw, desperate kind that made it sound like he was the only thing keeping me alive. I told him I was scared I'd lose him, that sometimes I felt like I didn't deserve him, that he was too good for me. I made him feel needed, essential, like a hero in a story where I was the damsel who required constant saving. The real Stella would never have done any of this. She was too proud, too self-sufficient, too aware of her own worth to make a man feel like he was her entire world. But I did it, and he ate it up like a starving man at a feast. Within weeks, he was talking about moving up the wedding. Within a month, he proposed again, because he'd already proposed once, to the real Stella, before she got sick. But this proposal was different. This one was passionate, desperate, romantic in a way the first one hadn't been. He got down on one knee at a family dinner, in front of both our families, and asked me to marry him with tears in his eyes. I said yes. The ring slid onto my finger, Stella's finger. Everyone thought, and I looked across the table at my sister. She was frozen, her face pale, her hands clenched in her lap. She couldn't object without revealing everything. She couldn't stop this without destroying herself, so she smiled. She raised her glass in a toast. She congratulated us both. And I saw in her eyes the exact moment she understood what I was doing. I was taking everything from her, piece by piece, and there was nothing she could do to stop me. The third phase was the hardest, because it required destroying the friendships I'd actually come to value. Over the last 18 months, I'd built real connections with Stella's friends. I'd gone from feeling like an imposter at their gatherings to genuinely enjoying their company. I'd laughed with them, confided in them, supported them through their problems. They felt like my friends now, not hers, but they thought they were hers. They thought all those late-night conversations, all those shared secrets, all those bonding moments had been with Stella. They didn't know they'd been falling in love with Luna. And they never would unless I showed them. I started creating situations where Stella would betray their trust. I shared secrets they'd told me in confidence, but to other people, making it look like Stella couldn't be trusted. I canceled plans at the last minute, repeatedly, making it seem like she didn't value their time. I made cutting comments about their insecurities, things they'd confided to me, weaponizing their vulnerabilities against them. It broke my heart to do it. These women had become important to me, but I told myself it was necessary. They'd never really been my friends anyway. They'd been Stella's friends who happened to like Luna, pretending to be Stella better than the original. When this was over, I'd have neither Stella's life nor my own. I'd be starting from scratch. I couldn't afford to be sentimental about relationships that had been built on lies. One by one, they started pulling away. The invitations became less frequent. The phone calls stopped. The warmth in their voices when they greeted Stella cooled to polite distance. I could see the confusion in their eyes. They didn't understand why their friend had changed so much. Why the girl they'd grown to love over the last year had become someone they barely recognized. My sister noticed this too. She tried to repair the damage, to reach out to them as Luna and explain that Stella was going through something, that she wasn't herself lately. But they didn't want to hear it from Luna. Luna was the quiet sister, the one who'd always been in the background. What did she know about Stella's inner life? The irony was excruciating. The real Stella was trying to defend the reputation of fake Stella. And no one would listen to her because they thought she was Luna. And Luna had never mattered by the time I was finished with Phase 3. Stella's social circle had effectively collapsed. The friends who'd once adored her now whispered about her behind her back. The invitations to parties and events had dried up. The social capital she'd spent 20 years building had evaporated in a matter of months, and through it all, Sebastian remained devoted. Because the version of Stella he loved, the vulnerable, passionate, deeply affectionate version, was the one I showed him in private. He didn't see the erratic, unreliable girl I was showing everyone else. He thought he was the only one who got to see the real Stella, the one beneath the polish and performance. He thought he was special. That's what made the fourth phase possible. I needed to destroy their relationship. But I needed to do it in a way that would make him realize he'd been in love with the wrong woman all along. That meant he couldn't just break up with Stella. He needed to understand that Stella wasn't who he thought she was, that the girl he'd fallen in love with was someone else entirely. So I started planting seeds of doubt. Small things at first. I'd mention memories that didn't match his recollection of events. I'd reference conversations we'd supposedly had that he couldn't quite remember. I'd react differently to things than he expected, in ways that made him question whether he really knew me. Stella, I'll remember when we talked about moving to the coast after we're married. I said one night over dinner. When I told you I'd always dreamed of living near the ocean. He looked confused. You've never wanted to live near the coast. You hate the beach. You said you got sunburned too easily. I laughed, light and dismissive. No, that was... I mean, I used to feel that way, but I've changed my mind. People can change their minds. Sebastian, right, he said slowly, but I could see the uncertainty in his eyes. Little moments like that, repeated over weeks, made him wonder if he'd ever really known his fiancé at all. Then I started pulling away emotionally. Not dramatically, nothing that would make him suspicious. Just small withdrawals of intimacy. I stopped initiating sex. I kept conversations. I was physically present but emotionally absent, like I was slowly disappearing, even as he looked right at me. He tried harder to connect with me, which was what I'd been counting on. He planned romantic dates, brought me flowers, asked me what was wrong in that desperate way men do when they feel their girlfriend slipping away and don't understand why. I told him nothing was wrong. I told him I loved him. I told him I was just stressed about the wedding planning, about family expectations, about returning to normal life after being sick for so long. All reasonable explanations. All lies. The truth was, I was preparing him for the final phase. I was training him to miss the connection we'd had, to grieve for the girl he'd thought I was, so that when I finally revealed the truth, the loss would be complete. My sister knew something was coming. She'd been watching me with increasing alarm, seeing her life crumble around her and understanding that I was the architect of its destruction. But she still hadn't figured out what my endgame was. She thought I was just acting out, rebelling against the role she'd forced me into. She didn't realize I had a plan. She cornered me one night in our parents' house, in the hallway between our bedrooms, where we used to whisper secrets after lights out when we were children. I know what you're doing, she said, her voice low and angry. You're destroying my life because you're mad at me. Because you think I didn't appreciate what you did for me. I leaned against the wall and looked at her really. Looked at her. She was wearing my clothes, my hairstyle, my expression of quiet concern. She'd become me so completely that I barely recognized my own face anymore. Is that what you think? I asked. That this is about appreciation. What else could it be about? You want me to thank you? Fine. Thank you, Luna. Thank you for stepping in when I needed you. Thank you for keeping my life together while I was sick. Thank you for being a good sister. The words were right, but her tone was contemptuous, like she was humoring a child's tantrum. You still don't get it, I said softly. This isn't about gratitude. This is about the fact that you took back a life I built. You're living in a house I constructed, wearing friendships I earned, trying to love a man who fell for someone else. And you don't even see it. That's insane, she hissed. It was always my life. You were just keeping it warm for me. Was I? I pushed off the wall and stepped closer to her, close enough that we were almost mirror images. Tell me something, Stella. When you came back, did you notice anything different? Did you notice that your friends were warmer, more genuine? That Sebastian looked at you like you hung the moon? That Dad's business partners actually respected you, instead of just tolerating you? She opened her mouth, then closed it. I could see the wheels turning in her mind, the realization starting to dawn. I didn't keep your life warm, I continued. I improved it. I took your shallow friendships and made them deep. I took your convenient relationship and made it real. I took your role as dad's pretty accessory and turned it into actual influence. And then you came back and put on my face and expected to just slide into all of it like you'd earned it. I was sick, she said, and for the first time, I heard uncertainty in her voice. I didn't ask to get sick. I didn't ask you to what? To become you. You're right, you didn't ask. Dad did. And I said yes because I loved you and I wanted to help you. But that's over now. I don't love you anymore, Stella. I don't even like you. And I'm going to make sure everyone sees what I see. She stared at me for a long moment, and I saw fear flicker across her features. What are you going to do? I smiled, and it wasn't Stella's smile or Luna's smile. It was something new, something sharp and dangerous that belonged only to me. You'll see, the final phase began 2 weeks later, at the engagement party our parents threw for Sebastian and me. It was a lavish affair at our family's estate, with 200 guests, a live orchestra, and enough champagne to drown a small army. Everyone who mattered in our social circle was their business associates, family friends, distant relatives, society columnists who would report every detail in the morning papers. I wore white, a deliberate choice that made me look bridal and innocent. Stella wore pale blue, a color that washed her out and made her look like a ghost at her own sister's celebration. She'd tried to object to the color when my mother showed her the dress, but our mother had been insistent. Luna always looks better in cool tones, she'd said, not even realizing the irony. Sebastian was radiant. He kept touching me, my hand, my waist, the small of my back, like he needed constant physical confirmation that I was real. He introduced me to everyone as his future wife with a pride that would have been touching if it wasn't so tragic. He had no idea that the woman he was planning to marry didn't exist. I played my part perfectly. I smiled and accepted congratulations and talked about wedding plans with the appropriate mix of excitement and nervousness. I danced with Sebastian's father, charmed his business partners, made his mother almost like me. I was everything Stella had never quite managed to be: warm without being effusive, confident without being arrogant, present without being performative, and all the while, I was waiting for the right moment. It came during the toasts. My father went first, giving a long speech about family and legacy, and how proud he was to see his daughter marrying into such a fine family. Sebastian's father followed, with jokes about gaining a daughter and losing golf weekends. Sebastian's best friend told embarrassing stories that weren't quite as funny as he thought they were. Then Sebastian stood up, glass in hand, and asked for everyone's attention. This wasn't planned. There was no toast from the groom on the schedule, but everyone quieted down anyway, eager to hear what he had to say. I know I'm not supposed to give a speech, he began, his voice carrying across the garden. But I wanted to say something while everyone's here. Stella, could you come up here with me? I walked to his side, my heart pounding. This wasn't part of my plan. I didn't know what he was going to say, and that uncertainty made me nervous in a way I hadn't been in months. He took my hand and turned to face the crowd. Most of you know that Stella and I have been together for a long time. What you might not know is that about 2 years ago, our relationship hit a rough patch. We were going through the motions, doing what everyone expected, but we'd lost something essential. I thought that was just what happened to couples over time. That the spark fades, and you settle into comfortable companionship. I felt ice creep up my spine. Where was he going with this? Then Stella got sick, he continued. And I'm ashamed to admit that part of me was relieved, because it meant we didn't have to address the problems in our relationship. We could focus on her health instead. But something unexpected happened during those months. Stella changed. She became more open, more vulnerable, more real. She let me see parts of herself I'd never seen before. She stopped performing and started just being. He turned to look at me, his eyes soft with emotion. The woman I'm marrying isn't the girl I started dating 4 years ago. She's better. She's braver. She's more herself. And I fall in love with her more every single day. So I wanted everyone here to know that this isn't just a marriage of convenience or family expectation. This is me choosing to spend my life with the most remarkable woman I've ever met. The crowd erupted in applause. People were crying. Sebastian's mother was dabbing at her eyes with a napkin. Even my father looked moved, which was saying something, and I felt everything inside me crack apart. Because he was right. The woman he was describing wasn't Stella. It was me, Luna, the girl who'd spent 18 months pretending to be her sister, and had accidentally shown him who she really was. He'd fallen in love with me, but he thought he'd fallen in love with her. I looked across the crowd and found my sister's face. She was pale, her jaw tight, her hands clenched around her champagne glass hard enough that I was surprised it didn't shatter. She understood too. She understood that Sebastian's love wasn't for her, had never been for her, would never be for her no matter how much she tried to reclaim it. This was my moment. This was when I was supposed to reveal everything, to stand up in front of 200 people and tell them the truth. To explain that the girl they'd been watching for the last 2 years wasn't Stella, but Luna. That the engagement they were celebrating was based on a lie. That the happy couple was actually a man in love with an imposter, and a woman who'd stolen her own sister's identity. I opened my mouth to do it. The words were right there, ready to detonate like a bomb in the middle of this perfect party. But then I looked at Sebastian, at the love and trust shining in his eyes, and I couldn't do it. Because destroying Stella's life would also destroy his. And whatever I felt about my sister, anger, resentment, betrayal, I'd never meant to hurt him. He was collateral damage in a war he didn't know was being fought. So instead of revealing the truth, I kissed him. I pulled him close and kissed him in front of everyone, and the crowd went wild with delight. And while they were all clapping and cheering, I whispered in his ear, so quietly that only he could hear, I need to tell you something. After the party. Just you and me. It's important. He pulled back, concerned. Is everything okay? Yes, I lied. Everything's perfect. I just need to talk to you alone. He nodded, trusting, and we turned back to the crowd to accept their congratulations. And across the garden, I saw my sister watching me with confusion and something that might have been relief. She thought I'd lost my nerve. She thought she'd won. She had no idea that I was about to do something worse than public humiliation. I was about to give her exactly what she wanted, and make sure it destroyed her. The party wound down around midnight. Guests started leaving in clusters, calling for cars, making plans to meet for brunch the next day to dissect every detail of the evening. My parents were glowing with satisfaction. The party had been a social triumph, the kind of event people would talk about for months. Stella tried to corner me as I was saying goodbye to some of Sebastian's relatives, but I avoided her, staying close to Sebastian and his family until she gave up and retreated to the house. I could feel her eyes on me, watching, waiting, trying to figure out what I was planning. Finally, everyone was gone, except for Sebastian and me. We walked to the gazebo at the edge of the garden. The same gazebo where we'd had our first real conversation 18 months ago. When I was still new to being Stella and terrified of being discovered. "What did you want to talk about?" he asked, settling onto the bench and pulling me down beside him. "You've seemed tense all night." I looked at him and tried to memorize this moment. The way the moonlight caught in his dark hair. The way his eyes crinkled when he smiled. The way he held my hand like it was precious, like I was precious. In another life, in another reality, where I was actually the person he thought I was. This could have been everything. "I need to tell you the truth about something," I began, my voice steady, despite the trembling in my chest. "About who I really am." His smile faded.
"What do you mean?"
"When Stella got sick," I said carefully, "she wasn't able to keep up with her social obligations. Her classes, her events, her relationship with you. So she asked someone to step in for her. To pretend to be her, just temporarily, until she was well enough to come back." He was very still. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that the girl you've been dating for the last 18 months isn't Stella. It's her twin sister. It's Luna, it's me." The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the wind in the trees, the distant sound of traffic from the main road, the hammering of my own heart. But Sebastian said nothing. He just stared at me like I'd started speaking a foreign language. "That's not funny," he finally said. "It's not a joke." I pulled my hand from his and stood up, needing distance for what came next. Stella got sick. Lupus. She needed treatment, needed to disappear for a while. But our family couldn't afford for her to disappear. Dad's business depends on the image of the perfect family. So I agreed to pretend to be her. I went to her classes, attended her events, dated her boyfriend. I became her so completely that no one noticed the difference. No. He stood too, backing away from me like I was contagious. "No, that's insane. You're Stella. I know you. I've known you for 4 years. You've known Stella for 4 years," I corrected. "You've known me for 18 months. Think about it, Sebastian. Think about when things changed between us. When I became different, more open, more vulnerable. When I started letting you in ways Stella never had. That wasn't Stella changing. That was me, Luna, not knowing how to be her, without letting pieces of myself show through." I could see him trying to process it, trying to reconcile what I was telling him with what he believed to be true. His face cycled through emotions, disbelief, confusion, anger, horror. "The memories," he said slowly. "The things we've done together over the last year and a half. That was you. All of it. Every conversation, every kiss, every moment of intimacy. That was me, Luna, pretending to be Stella. And then Stella got better, and she came back, and she wanted her life back. Including you. But you proposed to." He stopped, his eyes widening. "She's been back for months. The girl I've been with recently. That was really Stella. Some of it. We've been trading off. When I act erratic or unreliable, that's me sabotaging her reputation. When I'm warm and loving, that's me trying to hold on to you. We've been switching back and forth so much that even I sometimes forget which one of us is supposed to be where." He sat back down heavily, his head in his hands. "This isn't real. This is some kind of breakdown. You're Stella and you're having some kind of breakdown from the stress of the wedding." "I'm not Stella," I said gently. "I'm Luna. And I fell in love with you while I was pretending to be my sister. And that's why I have to tell you this now, before we get married. Because you deserve to know who you're actually in love with." He looked up at me, and I saw the moment belief started to creep in. The moment he stopped fighting the truth and started accepting it. "Prove it," he said hoarsely. "Prove you're not Stella." So I told him things only Luna would know. I told him about the night Stella and I switched places for the first time. How terrified I'd been, how I'd practiced her signature for hours in my bedroom. I told him about the voice coaching and the behavioral training, and the moment I realized I was better at being Stella than Stella had ever been. I told him about my own life. The one I'd abandoned my graduate program in literature, my tiny apartment near campus, my few friends who'd given up trying to reach me after I'd disappeared into my sister's identity. I told him about watching him fall in love with me while thinking he was falling in love with her. About the guilt and the joy and the impossible longing of being loved for who I was while wearing someone else's face. And finally, I told him to go inside and look at both of us together. To see Stella and Luna side by side and notice the differences he'd been trained not to see. The way Stella held herself with unconscious arrogance while Luna curved inward protectively. The way Stella's laugh was performative while Luna's was genuine. The way Stella looked at him with pleasant affection while Luna looked at him like he'd hung the stars. "If you still can't tell the difference after that," I said, "then it doesn't matter anyway. Because you'll never really know which one of us you're with." He stood up slowly, like a man in a dream, and walked back toward the house. I didn't follow. I stayed in the gazebo, surrounded by flowers and moonlight, and waited for my life to end. 20 minutes later, I heard footsteps on the path. 2 sets. I knew before they appeared that Sebastian had brought Stella with him, that he'd demanded to see us both together, that the moment of truth had finally arrived. They stepped into the gazebo together. Stella looked furious and terrified in equal measure. Sebastian just looked destroyed. "Tell me which one is which," he said, his voice flat. We stood there, mirror images, both wearing the same face with different souls behind it. I could see him trying to find the differences, trying to see what he'd been blind to for 18 months. "I'm Stella," my sister said. "I'm the one you've been with for 4 years. The one you proposed to the first time, before I got sick. She's Luna. She's been pretending to be me, but I'm back now, and she needs to stop this delusion. I'm Luna," I said quietly. "I'm the one who told you about my fear of deep water when we went to your parents' lake house. The one who memorized your coffee order and brought it to your office every Thursday. The one who stayed up all night with you when your grandfather died. Not saying anything, just being there. That was me. All of it was me." Sebastian looked between us, and I saw the exact moment he figured it out. His eyes widened, focusing on something in my face, some subtle difference in expression or energy that finally clicked into place. "The scar," he whispered. "Stella has a scar on her left shoulder from a bike accident when she was 12. Luna doesn't." It was such a small thing. Such a tiny detail. But it was enough. My sister's hand flew to her shoulder instinctively, and in that gesture, she gave herself away. Because I'd spent 18 months being Stella, and I'd learned all her unconscious tells. I knew that the real Stella touched that scar when she was nervous. A self-soothing gesture she'd developed after the accident. Luna, the girl everyone thought was Luna. The girl who was actually Stella, had just revealed herself. "You're Stella," Sebastian said, pointing at my sister. Then he turned to me, and his voice broke. And you're Luna. The girl I've been in love with. The girl I proposed to. The girl I was going to marry, thinking she was someone else. The silence that followed was devastating. Stella started crying, ugly sobs that shook her whole body. You can't choose her. She's nobody. She's always been nobody. I'm the one you're supposed to love. I'm the one you've always loved. I never loved you, Sebastian said, so quietly I almost didn't hear him. I tried. For 4 years, I tried to feel something real for you. But you were always so distant, so performative, like you were acting the part of my girlfriend without actually feeling it. And I thought that was just how you were, that I needed to accept it. Then you got sick, and something changed. You became real, vulnerable, present. And I fell in love with that version of you so hard and fast it terrified me. He turned to me, his eyes bright with unshed tears. But it wasn't you, was it, Stella? It was Luna, pretending to be you. And I never knew the difference, because I'd never really known you in the first place. So choose me now, I said, my voice steady, despite my shaking hands. Choose Luna. I'm right here. The girl you fell in love with, without the disguise. We can start over, do this right, build something real. He looked at me for a long moment, and I saw love and longing and anguish war across his features. How can I trust you? He asked. How can I trust anything you say when you've been lying to me for 18 months? When you let me propose to you, plan a future with you, all while wearing your sister's face. I didn't mean to fall in love with you, I said desperately. I was just trying to help Stella, to keep her life together while she recovered. But the more time I spent with you, the more I got to know the real you, the more I couldn't help it. And yes, I should have told you sooner. I should have been honest. But I was scared. Scared you wouldn't believe me. Scared you wouldn't love the real me. Scared I'd lose you if you knew the truth. You've already lost me, he said, and each word was a knife. Because I don't know who you are, Luna. I don't know what's real and what's performance. I don't know if the girl I fell in love with actually exists, or if she was just another character you were playing. And I can't build a life with someone I don't trust, no matter how much I love them. He pulled the engagement ring from his pocket, the one I'd given back to him when I'd asked to talk, held it out. Not to me, not to Stella. Just held it in his open palm like an offering to no one. I can't do this, he said. I can't marry either of you. I don't even know which one of you I was actually with at any given time. This whole thing is so twisted and wrong that I don't know how any of us thought it was okay. He dropped the ring on the gazebo bench and walked away. Just walked away. Out of the garden, out of our lives. Without looking back, Stella and I stood there, in silence, watching him go. Then she turned to me, and the hatred in her eyes was pure and absolute. You destroyed everything, she hissed. My relationship, my reputation, my life. All because you were jealous of me. Because you couldn't stand being in my shadow anymore. I wasn't in your shadow, I said tiredly. I was holding you up. I was the reason you still had anything to come back to. And you never once acknowledged that. You just took it all back like it was your birthright and I was a servant who'd been keeping it warm. It was my birthright. It's my life. My name, my face. You had no right to take it. You gave it to me. I shouted back, my composure finally cracking. You and Dad and Mom, you all begged me to do this. To give up my life, my identity, my existence so you could hide the fact that perfect Stella Ashford was sick and weak and human. You made me into you, and then you hated me for doing it too well. I never asked you to seduce my boyfriend. He was never your boyfriend. Not really. He was a social arrangement your parents made with his parents when you were both teenagers. You never loved him, Stella. You just loved what he represented: status, security, a continuation of the perfect life you'd always had. But I actually fell in love with him. The real him, not the idea of him. And he fell in love with the real me, even though he thought I was you. She slapped me then, hard enough that my head snapped to the side and I tasted blood. You're pathetic, she spat. You've always been pathetic. The sad little sister who could never measure up. Who had to steal my life because she didn't have one of her own worth living. I touched my stinging cheek and looked at her, my mirror, my twin, my sister, my enemy. And I realized that I didn't want to destroy her anymore. She was already destroyed. The life she'd come back to was ashes, and I'd been the one holding the torch. You're right, I said quietly. I didn't have a life worth living. But that's because I gave it all to you. Every dream I ever had, every relationship I tried to build, every piece of myself that made me Luna sacrificed it all to become you. And you know what the worst part is? I was better at being you than you ever were. People liked me more, respected me more, wanted to be around me more. And that's not because I'm pathetic. It's because you built your entire identity on being superior to everyone around you, and that made you cold and isolated, and ultimately alone. Get out, she said, her voice shaking. Get out of my house, out of my life, out of my sight. I never want to see you again. This is our parents' house, I corrected. But don't worry. I'm leaving. I'm going back to being Luna, whoever that is now. And you can have your life back, what's left of it, anyway. I hope it's everything you dreamed of. I walked past her, out of the gazebo, across the garden, through the house where I'd grown up. I didn't stop to pack. I didn't stop to say goodbye to our parents, who were probably asleep upstairs, blissfully unaware that their perfect family had just imploded. I just walked out the front door and kept walking. Down the long driveway, past the gates, into the street beyond. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have anywhere to go. My apartment had been sublet months ago. My friends had moved on. My graduate program had replaced me. I'd deleted Luna so thoroughly that there was nothing left to return to. But for the first time in 18 months, I felt like myself. Damaged, lost, heartbroken, but myself. I pulled out my phone and called the one person I thought might still care about the real me, my academic advisor from before. I'd dropped out to become Stella. Dr. Patricia Chen. A brilliant literature professor who'd been disappointed but understanding when I'd left her program. She answered on the third ring, her voice groggy with sleep. Luna, is that you? It's 2 in the morning. I know, I said, and my voice finally broke. I know, I'm sorry, but I didn't know who else to call. I need help. I need someone to remember who I was before I became someone else. There was a pause, and then her voice came back, alert and concerned. Where are you? Walking down Riverside Drive. I don't have anywhere to go. Stay there. I'm coming to get you. We're going to figure this out. I sat down on the curb and waited, watching the occasional car pass by, and let myself cry for everything I'd lost. For the sister who'd become a stranger. For the man I'd loved and lost. For the 18 months of my life I'd never get back. For the girl I'd been before any of this started. The one who'd thought love and family and sacrifice were simple, beautiful things, instead of weapons that could destroy you from the inside out. Dr. Chen found me 20 minutes later. She pulled up in her old Honda, got out, and wrapped me in a hug, without asking any questions. Then she drove me to her house, made me tea, and sat with me while I told her everything. When I was finished, she was quiet for a long time. Then she said, "What do you want to do now?" "I don't know," I admitted. "I don't know who I am anymore. I've been Stella for so long that I don't remember how to be Luna." "Then maybe," she said gently, "this is your chance to figure out who Luna is when she's not defined by being Stella's sister. When she's not the shadow, or the replacement, or the supporting character. Just Luna, standing on her own." It sounded impossible. It sounded terrifying. It sounded like exactly what I needed. Over the next 6 months, I rebuilt my life from scratch. Dr. Chen helped me re-enroll in the graduate program, vouching for me with the department and helping me catch up on the work I'd missed. I got a tiny studio apartment near campus, furnished it with second-hand furniture and books, made it into a space that was mine and only mine. I cut my hair, dyed it darker, changed my style from Stella's designer elegance to something more bohemian and relaxed. I needed to look in the mirror and see myself, not my sister staring back at me. I made new friends, people who'd never known Stella, who only knew me as Luna, the grad student with a mysterious past and a tendency to work too hard. I told them I'd taken time off for family reasons and left it at that. They didn't need to know about the 18 months I'd spent being someone else. I avoided social media, avoided the society pages, avoided anywhere I might see news about my family or Stella or Sebastian. I needed to heal in isolation, to figure out who I was without constantly comparing myself to who I'd been or who I'd pretended to be. But information has a way of finding you, even when you're hiding from it. I heard through Dr. Chen, who heard through the academic gossip network, that Stella had tried to repair her reputation and failed. Too many people had seen her behaving erratically. Too many friendships had been burned. Her social circle had collapsed, and she'd retreated from public life, much like she'd done when she was sick. The difference was that this time, no one particularly cared. I heard that Sebastian had moved to Seattle, taking a position with his company's West Coast office, getting as far away from both of us as possible, starting over in a city where no one knew him as the man who'd almost married one twin while falling in love with the other. I heard that my parents had been quietly furious when they learned what had happened, though they'd kept it out of the press. My father's business empire survived. Turned out that the perfect family image was less essential than he'd believed, that people cared more about his real estate acumen than his daughter's social standing. My mother had tried to reach out to me a few times, but I'd ignored her calls. I wasn't ready to forgive them for asking me to disappear in the first place. And I heard, about 8 months after that night in the gazebo, that Stella had gotten engaged. To someone I'd never heard of, a lawyer from Chicago she'd met online. Someone who'd never known the old Stella, who only knew the quiet, slightly damaged version she'd become. Someone who could love her without comparing her to the ghost of who she used to be. I felt nothing when I heard that news. No jealousy, no satisfaction, no lingering anger. Just a distant hope that maybe she'd found something real, something that wasn't built on performance and pretense and family expectation. As for me, I was still figuring it out, still learning how to be Luna without the shadow of Stella hanging over me, still working through the guilt and the grief, and the complicated tangle of love and resentment I felt toward my twin. but I was writing again. Really writing, not just the academic papers required for my degree, but creative work that felt honest and raw and mine. Stories about identity and family, and the masks we wear, and what happens when we forget which face is real. Dr. Chen thought I should write about what had happened to me, turn it into a memoir or a novel. But I wasn't ready for that yet. Maybe I never would be. Some stories are too painful to tell, too twisted to untangle, too honest to share. I was in a coffee shop near campus, working on my thesis about the use of doubles in Gothic literature. The irony wasn't lost on me when someone sat down across from me. I looked up, expecting to see a classmate or maybe a stranger asking to share the table. Instead, I saw Sebastian. He looked different, thinner, older, with shadows under his eyes that hadn't been there before. He was wearing jeans and a sweater instead of his usual business attire, and his hair was longer, less carefully styled. "Hi, Luna," he said quietly. My heart stuttered. I hadn't heard from him since that night. Hadn't expected to ever see him again. "What are you doing here?" I managed to ask. "Dr. Chen told me where to find you." "I hope that's okay. I know I don't have the right to just show up like this, but I needed to see you. To talk to you, if you're willing." I should have told him to leave. Should have protected the fragile peace I'd built for myself. But I'd never been good at protecting myself from the people I loved. "Okay," I said. "Talk." He looked down at his hands, gathering his thoughts. "I spent the last 8 months in therapy," he began, trying to understand what happened, how I could have been so blind, why I fell in love with someone I didn't really know. And I learned some things about myself that weren't particularly flattering. Like what? Like the fact that I was never really in love with Stella. The original Stella, I mean. I was in love with the idea of her, with what our relationship represented. Status, security, continuing the life my parents had planned for me. I never questioned whether she was right for me, because I'd been taught not to question. I'd been taught to accept the life that was laid out and be grateful for it. He looked up, meeting my eyes. "Then you came along, pretending to be her but actually being yourself. And you showed me what real connection felt like. What it was like to be with someone who saw me, really saw me, instead of just seeing my last name and my trust fund and my usefulness to their social climbing." "I lied to you," I said. "For 18 months, I lied to you every single day." "You did," he agreed. And I was furious about that for a long time. I felt betrayed and used and like I couldn't trust my own judgment about anything. But my therapist helped me understand something important. You weren't the only one lying. Stella was lying too, pretending to be the perfect girlfriend when she actually felt nothing. Your parents were lying, creating this elaborate deception to hide their daughter's illness. I was lying to myself about what I wanted and who I was. Everyone was performing. Everyone was pretending. You were just the only one honest enough to eventually tell the truth. "That doesn't make it okay," I said. Double quotes, "No, it doesn't. But it makes it human. It makes it complicated. It makes it something I can maybe forgive, given time." I looked at him, at this man I'd loved and lost, and never expected to see again. "Why are you here, Sebastian? What do you want from me?" "I want to know if Luna is single," he said simply. Not Stella pretending to be Luna. Not Luna pretending to be Stella. Just Luna, the real person underneath all the masks. Because I've spent 8 months trying to get over her, and I can't. I fell in love with you, Luna. with your kindness and your intelligence and the way you actually listened when I talked. With the girl who brought me coffee and stayed up all night when I was grieving and wasn't afraid to be vulnerable. And I don't know if that girl even exists anymore, or if she was just another performance. But I needed to find out. I felt tears prick at my eyes. I don't know if that girl exists either, I admitted. I don't know who I am without the pretense. I've spent the last 8 months trying to figure that out, and I'm still not sure I have an answer. Then maybe, he said, echoing Dr. Chen's words from months ago, we could figure it out together. No pretense this time. No family expectations. No lies. Just two people who made mistakes, trying to see if there's something real worth building. I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to say yes so badly it hurt. But I'd learned something over the last 8 months of therapy and self-reflection and painful growth. I couldn't build something real with someone else until I knew who I was on my own. I need more time, I said. I need to finish becoming Luna before I can be Luna with someone else. Does that make sense? He smiled, sad but genuine. It makes perfect sense. How much time do you need? I don't know. Maybe 6 months. Maybe a year. Maybe forever. I can wait, he said. I've already waited 8 months. What's a little longer? He stood up to leave, then paused, his hand resting on the back of the chair. Can I ask you something? Okay, when you were being Stella, when we were together, was any of it real? Or was it all just you playing a role? I thought about that question for a long moment, trying to give him the honesty he deserved. It was both, I finally said. I was playing Stella, but the feelings were mine. The conversations we had, the way I felt when you touched me. The love I felt for you, that was all Luna. I just didn't know how to separate who I was from who I was pretending to be. He nodded slowly, like he was trying to absorb that. That's what I needed to know. He pulled a business card from his wallet and set it on the table. This is my new number. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, call me. I'll be waiting. Then he walked away, and I watched him go without calling him back. 18 months later, I defended my thesis. Dr. Chen sat in the front row, beaming with pride as I presented my analysis of Gothic doubles and the performance of identity. The irony of my topic wasn't lost on the committee, but they didn't know the personal experience that had informed every page. I graduated with honors. My parents sent flowers but didn't attend the ceremony. My mother's card said, "Congratulations, sweetheart. We're proud of you. Love, Mom and Dad." It was the first communication I'd had from them in almost 2 years. I put the card in a drawer and didn't respond. Stella sent a text, "Heard you graduated. Good for you." I stared at those 4 words for a long time, trying to decode them. Was it genuine, sarcastic, an olive branch, or a formality? In the end, I decided it didn't matter. I texted back, "Thanks. I heard you got married. I hope you're happy." She didn't respond, and I didn't expect her to. Some bridges aren't meant to be rebuilt. Some relationships are meant to be mourned and released. I took a position teaching composition at a small liberal arts college 3 states away. It wasn't prestigious, but it was mean a job I'd earned with my own credentials, not my family's connections. A life where no one knew about Stella or Sebastian or the girl I'd been before. I learned to be myself. I dated occasionally. Nice men who made me laugh, who respected my boundaries, who didn't push when I said I needed to take things slow. None of them became serious. I wasn't ready yet, Wasn't sure I'd ever be ready to let someone that close again, but I was happy. Or at least, I was becoming happy. I had my own apartment, filled with books and plants and mismatched furniture. I had colleagues who respected me, students who challenged me, a routine that felt solid and real. I had therapy appointments every other week, where I continued to untangle the knots of my past. I had a life that was small and quiet, and entirely my own. Sebastian's business card stayed in my wallet for 2 years. I took it out sometimes, ran my thumb over the raised letters of his name, wondered what would happen if I called. But I never did. I told myself I wasn't ready. That I needed more time. That I had to be completely whole before I could offer myself to someone else. The truth was simpler and more complicated. I was afraid. Afraid that whatever we'd had was only real in the context of the lie. Afraid that, without Stella's face between us, we'd discover there was nothing there at all. Afraid that I'd built him up in my memory into something he could never be in reality, so I didn't call. And the seasons changed. And my life continued in its small, steady way. Then, 3 years after that conversation in the coffee shop, I was at an academic conference in Boston. I'd just finished presenting a paper on identity and authenticity in contemporary literature when I saw him in the audience. He looked good, healthy, his eyes were bright and clear. The shadows I remembered from our last meeting, long gone. He was wearing a wedding ring. My stomach dropped. Of course he'd moved on. I'd told him to wait, and he'd waited, and then I'd never called. And eventually, he'd done what people do when the person they're waiting for never comes back. He'd found someone else. I should have been happy for him. I should have felt relief that the decision had been made for me. That I could finally let go of the what-ifs and move forward with my life instead. I felt like I'd lost him all over again. He approached me after the panel, weaving through the crowd of academics. "Luna Ashford," he said, and hearing my name in his voice after all this time made my chest ache. "That was a brilliant paper. Thank you," I managed. "I didn't know you were interested in literary criticism. I'm not, usually. But I saw your name in the conference program, and I had to come. Had to see how you were doing." We stood there awkwardly, 3 years of silence between us, and I didn't know what to say. Finally, I gestured to his left hand. "Congratulations on getting married." He looked confused, then followed my gaze to his hand and laughed, a genuine, surprised laugh that I remembered from our time together. "This is my grandfather's ring. He died 2 years ago and left it to me. I wear it because it reminds me of him, not because I'm married." The relief that flooded through me was so intense, it made me dizzy. "You're not married?" "No. Still waiting, apparently. Though I'm starting to think the person I'm waiting for might have forgotten about me." "I didn't forget," I said quietly. I wasn't ready. I needed to figure out who I was first. And then I was afraid too much time had passed, that you'd moved on, that calling you would just open old wounds that had finally healed. "I haven't moved on," he said. "I tried. Dated other people, built a new life in Seattle, went to therapy, did all the things you're supposed to do to get over someone. But I couldn't stop wondering what would have happened if you'd called. If we'd tried again, without all the lies and pretense. If Luna and Sebastian could work when it was just the two of us, without Stella's ghost between us." I looked at him, really looked at him. And saw the same hope and fear I felt reflected in his eyes. "I'm still figuring myself out," I warned him. I'm still learning how to be Luna without defining myself in relation to Stella or my family or anyone else. It's messy and complicated, and I can't promise I won't hurt you again. I know, he said. And I can't promise I'll be able to fully trust you right away. Or that we won't have moments where the past comes back to haunt us. But I think we owe it to ourselves to try. To see if what we had was real, or if it was just the product of an impossible situation. What if it wasn't real? I asked. What if we try and discover that we're incompatible without the heightened emotions and the deception and all the drama? He smiled, and it was the same smile I'd fallen in love with years ago. Then at least we'll know. At least we won't spend the rest of our lives wondering what if. I thought about the girl I'd been at 20, so eager to sacrifice herself for her sister's happiness. I thought about the girl I'd become at 22, consumed by anger and revenge, destroying everything she touched. And I thought about the woman I was now at 25. Still imperfect, but at least honest, still damaged, but finally healing. Okay, I said. Let's try. But slowly. No rushing into engagement or marriage or any of the things we thought we wanted before. Just coffee, conversation, getting to know each other as the people we actually are. I can do slow, he said. I've had 3 years of practice. We went to dinner that night after the conference ended. We talked for hours, and it was strange and wonderful and occasionally awkward. We told each other about the last 3 years, his job in Seattle, my teaching position, the ways we'd changed and grown. We talked about therapy and healing, and the work we'd both done to become people who could be honest with themselves and others. We didn't talk about Stella. We didn't talk about my parents or his family or the engagement party that had imploded. Those were conversations for later, for when we were strong enough to excavate those memories without being destroyed by them. When he walked me back to my hotel, he didn't try to kiss me. He just took my hand and said, "Can I see you again?" When we're both back in our regular lives, not just at a conference. I'd like that, I said. Good, because I have a feeling this is going to take a while, and I want to make sure we do it right this time. He was correct. It did take a while. We saw each other once a month for the first 6 months, meeting halfway between my college town and Seattle. We took walks and went to museums and had long dinners where we talked about everything except the complicated history between us. Then, gradually, we started talking about that too. About the 18 months where I'd worn Stella's face and he'd fallen in love with me without knowing it. About the night everything had shattered and how we'd both had to rebuild ourselves from the ruins. About the guilt and the anger and the grief we'd both carried. It wasn't always easy. There were moments when he'd look at me, and I could see him wondering if I was telling the truth or performing again. There were moments when I'd catch myself slipping into old habits, becoming what I thought he wanted instead of being who I was. But we worked through it. Slowly, carefully, with more honesty than either of us had ever brought to a relationship before. 2 years after that conference in Boston, Sebastian moved back east. Not to my city. Not yet. We both agreed that was too much, too fast. But close enough that we could see each other every weekend instead of once a month. 3 years after that, he asked me to marry him. Not at a family dinner in front of 200 people, but on a quiet beach at sunset, just the two of us. No performance, no audience, no expectations except the ones we'd built together. I said yes. And this time, when the ring slid onto my finger, it felt like truth instead of deception. Like a promise I could actually keep. We got married on a Thursday afternoon in a small ceremony at the courthouse. with Dr. Chen and 2 of Sebastian's friends as witnesses. No fancy wedding, no society pages coverage, no elaborate performance for the benefit of families who'd spent years trying to control our lives. My parents weren't invited. Sebastian's parents weren't invited. And Stella definitely wasn't invited. But 3 days before the wedding, I got a package in the mail. Inside was a small box wrapped in silver paper, and tucked inside the box was a note in Stella's handwriting. Luna, I heard you're getting married. I hope you'll be very happy. I really mean that. What we did to each other was terrible, and I've spent 5 years in therapy trying to understand my part in it. I don't expect forgiveness. I'm not sure I deserve it. But I want you to know that I'm sorry. For taking credit for your work. For not thanking you when you saved my life. For being so consumed by my own pain that I couldn't see yours. You were right. You were always the better Stella. But more importantly, you were always the better person. I hope you've learned to be Luna again. I hope you've found yourself. Love, your sister. Inside the box was a silver bracelet, simple, elegant, nothing flashy. Engraved on the inside were 2 words, "Shine, anyway." I cried when I read the note. Not tears of anger or bitterness, but something softer. Something like closure. I didn't respond to Stella's note. Maybe I would someday. When enough time had passed that we could look at each other without seeing all the ways we'd failed each other. But for now, the note was enough. The acknowledgement was enough. On my wedding day, I wore the bracelet. Not for Stella, but for myself. A reminder that I'd survived. That I'd found my way back to being Luna after spending years being someone else. That I could shine with my own light instead of borrowed brilliance. Sebastian noticed the bracelet during the ceremony. He didn't ask where it came from, but he squeezed my hand, and I knew he understood. After we were married, we had dinner at a small Italian restaurant, just us, Dr. Chen, and Sebastian's friends. No speeches, no toasts, no elaborate performances. Just good food and easy conversation, and the simple pleasure of being surrounded by people who knew us and loved us anyway. So how does it feel? Dr. Chen asked me over dessert. Being married to the man you fell in love with while pretending to be your sister. Sebastian choked on his wine, and I laughed a real laugh, genuine and unguarded. It feels, I said, thinking about it carefully, like coming home to a place I've never been before. Like finally being exactly where I'm supposed to be, with exactly who I'm supposed to be with, as exactly who I am. That's beautiful, Dr. Chen said, raising her glass. To Luna and Sebastian. May you always know who you're waking up next to. We clinked glasses, and I looked at my husband. What a strange and wonderful phrase, and saw him looking back at me with love and trust. And not a single shadow of doubt. It had taken us 7 years to get here. 7 years of mistakes, and lies, and betrayals, and painful, necessary growth. 7 years of learning how to be ourselves instead of who we thought we should be, but we'd made it. Against all odds, despite all the reasons it should never have worked. We'd built something real. Sometimes I think about that night in the gazebo. When I stood there wearing Stella's engagement ring and thought about destroying everything. About the rage I'd felt, the need for revenge, the desire to make her pay for taking back a life I'd built. I don't regret telling Sebastian the truth. That confession, as painful and destructive as it was, had been necessary. We'd needed to burn everything down so we could rebuild on solid ground instead of lies. But I regret the cruelty. I regret sabotaging Stella's friendships and her reputation. I regret trying to destroy her the way I felt she'd destroyed me. Because in the end, we'd both been victims of the same system of family that valued appearance over authenticity, performance over truth, image over reality. She'd been wrong to take back her life without acknowledging my sacrifice. But I'd been wrong to seek revenge instead of simply walking away. We'd both paid the price for those mistakes. She'd lost the life she'd spent 20 years building. I'd lost 18 months I could never get back. And the relationship with my twin that had once been the most important thing in my world. But we'd both survived. We'd both rebuilt. And maybe, someday, we'd find our way back to each other, not as Stella and Luna, the golden twin and her shadow, but as two women who'd survived impossible circumstances and learned to be themselves in spite of everything. For now, though I had my own life, my own marriage, my own identity that belonged to me and no one else, I was Luna Carver now. Not Luna Ashford, not Stella's twin, not the girl who'd spent 18 months being someone else. Just Luna, teaching literature to undergraduates who called me Professor Carver and had no idea about my complicated past. Writing papers about identity and authenticity with the authority of someone who'd lost both and found them again. Coming home every evening to a man who loved me for exactly who I was. It was a small life, quieter than the one I'd built while wearing Stella's face. But it was mine, and that made it perfect. On the first anniversary of our wedding, Sebastian surprised me with a gift. It was a framed photo not of us, but of the gazebo where everything had fallen apart. He'd gone back to my parents' estate and photographed it on a spring day, with flowers blooming and sunlight streaming through the lattice. "Why would you give me this?" I asked, confused. "Because that's where Luna was born," he said. Not the Luna who was raised to be Stella's shadow, but the real Luna, the one who was brave enough to tell the truth even though it cost her everything. The one who chose honesty over comfort, even when honesty was terrifying. That night destroyed us, but it also freed us. I wanted you to remember that. I hung the photo in my office at the college, where I could see it while I worked. A reminder of how far I'd come. Of the girl who'd been so afraid of being seen that she'd hidden behind someone else's face. Of the moment she'd finally stepped into the light as herself. Sometimes students would ask about it. "Is that your family's estate?" They'd say, noticing the expensive architecture and manicured gardens. "It used to be," I'd reply. "But I don't live there anymore." And that was true in more ways than one. I didn't live in that world anymore, the world of appearances and performances, and sacrificing yourself for family image. I lived in a world where I could be honest, messy, imperfect, real. I lived in a world where I was finally, completely, undeniably myself, and I'd never felt more at home.